beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. I had to check the storage on this iPad before diving in here to our video. It's crazy, I bought this iPad like over 3 years ago and I opted for more storage, not realizing that I'd be doing videos on it, but and then now, and here it is, and I'm like, wow, some of this stuff is from 3 years ago. Anyway, so we're gonna dive in here. I took a couple of notes, and I'm first gonna talk about music teaching and music therapy. So I specifically said music teaching because, you know, MT, and then we have music therapy, MT. So I am a firm believer that music teaching really bridges the gap between a music therapist student and a music therapist active practice. So we're going to talk first, of course, what's the difference? Because everybody asks that question. So music education, music teaching is using music to teach musical skills. Obviously, you're going to teach somebody piano or teach them how to advance their piano skills with music. That's music teaching. Music therapy is when you use music for non-musical goals, like rhythm for gait. My favorite, music for memory. So those are the differences. Music teaching, music education uses music for musical goals. Music therapy uses music for non-musical goals. That's the easiest way to break it down for people, and that's actually really what you're doing. Okay, so we gotta discuss being a music therapy student, especially at the bachelor's level. Okay, friends, I hate to break it to you, but bachelor's level learning, for the most part, is passive learning. Did you get that? You are passively learning. And I know, like, you know, you could actively learn, but for the most part, a bachelor's degree is passive learning. You're taking in information, you're studying it, you're memorizing it, you're learning it, you're sitting in class listening for the most part. I don't know if any of you guys record your lectures, but you know, maybe you run the tapes, or you have recorded lectures and you just run the tapes, or you read a chapter in the book. This is all passive learning. And then once you actually physically do something, like you take a quiz, or you do the Quizlet, like where you type in the answer, you know, or you do some work problems, like that's active learning. But a bachelor's degree is passive learning. Like, I hate to break it to you, and I mean, it's easy in that regard. You just have to, read, you memorize, and then you forget everything after the test. Like, and that's just the way it is. It's just the way it's structured, because you need to, like, learn the facts before you dive into anything more intense. So if you're a music therapy student and you're passively learning, like you're sitting in class, like not only are you learning music therapy skills, but you're learning general music skills, music history, music theory, piano lab. Piano lab isn't necessarily passive learning, of course, and guitar lab, and you know, I had to do music technology. That was a disaster of a class, just obviously because I'm not very good at editing. But those could possibly be like active learning classes. But when you get to the music therapy, like the knit and grit, the medical practices of music therapy, honestly, I spent the entire class sitting, listening, writing papers, and then there was like, I don't know, one class or two classes, two if that, where we actually implemented sessions. And of course they were a disaster because, like, you know, you spent, how many hours is a class in a semester? You literally spend like 90 hours of that class just passively learning, and then you're expected to do like 10% of it implementation. And implementation is hard. Implementation, that's like like for a music therapy student, it's almost like asking a personal trainer to play piano. Like a personal trainer is physically fit enough to play piano, but they've never actually put the skills, like put the fingers, the reading the notes, the playing with the pedal, like they haven't put everything together, and that's what tends to happen. Music education, music teaching is that one saving grace that really bridges the gap. And I'm going to explain why. Well, first of all, money, right? Because like being a music teacher, a private music teacher, it does pay pretty well, so you don't necessarily have to work that much to make, you know, enough for expenses, depending on what you buy. But in college, you know, I had to pay, sometimes I had to pay for clothes, sometimes I had to pay for food if we were going out, sometimes I had to pay for other things, and music teaching, like, that covered all of that, you know, and I only really worked like a max of 5 hours a week. So yes, it is doable to teach music lessons while you're a music therapist, especially if you do private lessons. Like, then you're freelancer, you are free game. You can work 5 hours a week, you could work 30 hours a week, you know? So it's definitely doable to fit into your schedule, and I recommend doing a freelance, which I think they pretty much all are, like Music and Arts, Guitar Center. If you do any private music lessons with a school, like with a music school where you go to the patients or go to the students' houses, that's also freelance. So as long as like you don't start your own business, then it's easy to fit in, like, you know, you don't have to commit to that many hours. If you're trying to be a music teacher and have like your own business, well, then that's going to take more time, of course. So anyway, I really think that music teaching bridges the gap, because you're going from a student, a passive learning student, to an active implementation music therapist. And when you teach music, you're taking your musical skills and you're applying them, but you're not necessarily medically implementing them. So it is that step in between. Another reason why I love music teaching as a gap bridger is because you get to work with a lot of different populations and you can apply your skills, and you're not necessarily going to be hurting anybody. So I'll give you guys an example. During my internship, one thing that was told to me was to channel my energy appropriately based on the population. So I could practice this skill as a music teacher because I had children, I had really young children, I had teenagers, I had adults. So obviously I could practice, okay, how am I going to act in a music lesson setting with a child? Like, how much energy do I have to give out? How much energy do I have to give out for an adult or for a teenager? So I could take that correction, and even though I wasn't necessarily doing music therapy, I was still practicing that skill. Again, you know, you get to work with a lot of different populations. You get to learn, I guess, new music. Honestly, my students have been the best. They've taught me like a ton of different genres, which really helped me, yet again, in the music therapy realm, learning songs that like I never heard of that was brought up from a student. Sometimes you can learn things from your students, like songwriting. Like, I don't really like songwriting, but I've had students who really are passionate about it, and their passion kind of inspires me to like not be so kicking and screaming in terms of songwriting. So yes, and then you have populations, you get to work on certain corrections, you get to learn new genres. The one thing with music teaching that could potentially be a struggle as a music therapist is when you're teaching music, you do have to adapt. And the way I look at it is it's very black and white. Like, the student is, you know, they're an auditory learner, they're a visual learner, or they're a little mixture of both. the student isn't necessarily grasping the concept when you talk to them, so maybe you should show them. You know, like little things like that you might have to change and adapt, but to be honest, I always thought that adapting in a music teaching setting was a lot easier than adapting in the music therapy setting, just because the music therapy setting, there's lots of different variables. You do have to remember that if a student is taking music lessons, just like you, because we all took music lessons, we were all that student at one point too, you gotta remember that the student taking music lessons is talented in and of themselves. They really like the activity, they're passionate. Some of them are really passionate about it, some of them end up going into music in the future. So, and a lot of times they do have the financial means, you know, to provide for this passion. So when you're working with these students, they're very smart and brilliant people, you know, so you don't, it's a lot easier for you if you're unsure about something, because, you know, you don't have to be perfect, because a lot of times these students are going to get it. You know, you don't have to, you're not going to be hurting anybody like in music therapy. You're not going to be like playing around, trial and error. I don't really think they accomplished the goal. Like none of that stuff is going to happen. So, and then most importantly, teaching music is going to boost your confidence. Again, like as a beginner, a music therapist entering a practicum, entering an internship, like it's scary because you're going from, and you're going to be unconfident because you're going from sitting in the classroom to actually out here in front of patients, and anything can happen. When you're teaching music, you already get that experience of being with somebody, and you're with somebody one-to-one. I think Guitar Center, they'll do like group sessions, like where you can teach a group. So if you're into that and you work for the Guitar Center, you could potentially be teaching a group and then, you know, gain that experience that way if you're unsure about that. But the point is that you're working in front of people, and you're talking to people, and you're talking to students. You're going to gain that confidence. And like I said, music students are smart, brilliant people regardless of the age. So it's going to be positive feedback. And if you do something wrong, like they'll tell, like most of the time they say, oh, I don't get it. I don't understand. Can you do that again? You know, like they'll give you verbal feedback if you do need to change something in the session and you're new at it. So you're not like, maybe you're not ready, you know? Poor doctor, if you're so passionate about teaching, why didn't you go into music education? I get this question a lot because I am passionate about teaching. I actually really like it. I'm actually very naturally talented in it. Well, when you become a music educator in a school, there's procedures that you have to follow. And I feel like those procedures are limiting, and we all know me, I'm a rebel. I'm a music therapist. I'm a musician. I say no to the man. And saying no to the man in the music educator's perspective is preparing students for winter and spring concerts. I honestly do not believe that prepping students for winter and spring concerts is the best way to prepare them musically. I think that music is a growing field, and like when you acquire musical skills, it's continual. And yes, you should have like a goal. Like yes, you should do community theater, you should have a recital, you should have a concert, to give yourself something to look forward to. But when you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, a group, everybody adapts at a different rate. So it's not like in college, you can have a symphony orchestra concert in the winter and in the spring, because even though everybody's still learning and adapting their skills, the basis is pretty much there. Whereas, like, I'm sorry, but no 17-year-old has, like, a stable basis. Especially if, like, they didn't have private lessons and they're just in public school, you know? So it's like, and then also there's this, like, psychology component where, like, you know, elementary, middle school, high school, you know, they're dealing with the social pressures and all that fun stuff. So it's like, you really need music to be a learning environment. You need it to, I believe that you need it to be a continual learning environment. I think as a music teacher, you really should promote confidence. You should promote creativity. You should promote continual learning. And in the music educator world, you don't necessarily have the freedom to do that. It's often get, like, prep for this concert, then prep for that concert. And yeah, the music, like, is challenging, but it's not as challenging as it could be if you didn't have to prep for a concert at all. That's one of the reasons why in high school in particular, it is encouraged to have private music lessons, because you can't really necessarily learn from a public school system. And that to me is annoying and bothers me on so many different levels, because if I'm in public school, clearly I can't afford private lessons. But that's besides the point. That's why I didn't want to be a music educator, but I do like teaching. Like, I do like teaching on a personal level. Practicum, internship, supervisor, obviously, love it. I hope I get to be, like, a resident supervisor one day, because I mean, I already did it. Like, the concentration was different, but I already have the managerial, the teaching experience, the bubbly personality, and I am harsh. Actually, I'm very, very mean. Not on this channel, though. It's not really necessary, right? So yeah, so I get that question a lot. How will I work teaching music lessons into my schedule as a music therapy major? As I mentioned before, you know, I suggest private music lessons first, because as a freelancer, because that's, like, the easiest way. You're not necessarily, you're committed to your families, but you can kind of choose, like, oh, I only want 5 families, you know, or I want 20 families, you know, and you can kind of pick and choose how many people you really want to work with. Going through a school, like going through a music teaching school, like, and when I say school, I mean a company where they find the students for you. They hire you, they find the students for you, and then you're responsible for reporting the lessons to them. I think that's the best way to go in college as well. You don't necessarily make as much as if you did it freelance, but you got to remember that you're just starting. So it's really important that you have people finding, you know, families for you. You have people to report to, so that way they can pay you appropriately. If you're just starting, like, I really believe that you need to work for an organization first before going off and being a freelancer, because you could get screwed over money-wise, you could get screwed over legally, there could be miscommunications, and families might take it personally. So there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, and I always think it's best to do it through an organization, kind of learn how they handle it. Is it one person dealing with the inquiries? Is it a team of people? And then when you go off, if teaching music lessons privately is something you want to do, well, now you know how a successful business is run, so you can implement that. What's another thing to discuss? Oh yeah, the negative impact teaching music has on music therapy. So a lot of people do get confused, and when you go into the interview and you discuss, oh, I'm a music therapy student, I want to start teaching lessons, you know, with your company, or, you know, maybe you tell your advisor, right? Because that's an appropriate thing to tell an advisor, like, hey, I'm gonna teach music lessons, like, on the side. I thought that was an appropriate thing to tell an advisor. Apparently it wasn't. My advisor in undergrad was a disaster. She didn't like me. And one of the reasons why is because I often said no to the man, and I taught music lessons. And she was one of those music therapists that really worked hard to distinguish a definition of music therapy separate from music education. So me going in as a music therapy major, teaching music lessons, it only harmed the work that she already put in. So that's why I'm mentioning to have a clear definition of music education and music therapy, okay? And to also keep in mind that a lot of people translate your music therapy degree as music education with a specialty in special ed, you know, or with music education with a certification in special ed, you know, like that's what it kind of translates to. So then a lot of times, like if you work for a company, they might end up giving you clients that have special learning conditions, clients maybe that have a disorder. And when I say disorder, okay, like I don't necessarily mean they're like medically complex developmental disorders for the most part, you know. They're not the type of clients that you're going to be seeing in your clinical sites. Usually, especially if you're working at like music and arts or guitar center, or a school focused around children, you're going to end up getting like a child with high functioning autism, or you're going to get a child with ADHD that's a little like sporadic ADHD, nothing diagnosed ADHD, you know. You might get a client or a student who's emotionally fragile or sensitive. These are things that like parents often mention as if they're like a really bad thing, but it's just like, it's not bad. Like I've seen worse, you know. But just keep that in mind that might end up happening to you if you mention that you're a music therapist. You might end up getting students with learning disabilities. And you can totally handle it, you know, you have all the skill sets. But the point is that you really want to advocate yourself as a music therapist. You know, like I'm going to school for music therapy so I can work in a hospital. I'm going to school for music therapy so I can work in hospice. These are terms that these people understand. So I'm going to music therapy so I can work with individuals who have medical complications, you know. I am perfectly fine, you know, working with somebody who has a learning disability, but I just want to let you know that is not, you know, I'm not a music educator. I am a music therapist. I am I'm training to be a medical professional, not an educator. And I would watch, like, when you mention that, watch who you say it to, because you really shouldn't be saying that in a job interview. But if your families come up to you and start, like, oh, like, you know, you're so good teaching my kid. Can you teach the neighbor's kid? They have a disability. Yeah, you know, yes, I have the skill sets to educate an individual with a disability. Just wanted to let you know I'm going to school to be a music therapist, though. I'm going to school to be a music professional. However, I do have the skill set, you know. And then I would especially mention this to your advisor, because especially if you get an advisor like mine, who thought that I was taking this whole issue too lightly, you can always mention that, like, you know, I've cleared the path, you know, I've distinguished the two in my head, and I advocate as such. I am not going to be one of those individuals who mixes up or influences the mix-up of music education and music therapy. Because that is like a major fear in a lot of music therapists, especially when you take on music lessons. But anyway, so that's the story, Morning Glory. I suggest that you do, if you are having issues or you're nervous or anxious about entering into the clinical field, I do recommend that you become a music teacher and do it freelance, so that way there's no time commitment, you know. It might be hard to get started because you're going to be entry level, but I know you can do it, and it's a wonderful, wonderful way to make some extra money and really, really bridge the gap between being a passive learning student and a full-fledged music therapist. Who knows, you might actually like it and you might end up doing it like long term like I did. I actually taught music lessons for like 4 years straight. When I got my first job as a music therapist, just because I liked it so much, and it was a really great way to get some extra income too. So who knows, you might end up liking it. But the point is to just make sure that you have a clear definition in your head and make sure you advocate that to fellow music therapy students, and especially to your advisor and to your employer if you end up getting any pushback, okay? I hope it helps. I really hope that you enjoy teaching music lessons while you're in school as much as I did. Talk to you guys later. Bye!